After abandoning him at a wildlife reserve, a lion spots a small child sobbing on the road. As he begins to charge toward the youngster, this intimidating large cat makes eye contact with him and lets out a loud roar. What comes next is just amazing. Scout circled around the child, whose tears were growing increasingly intense. There was nobody else in the area, and it was still early in the morning. With the morning breeze blowing through his magnificent mane, Scout, the enormous lion, walked back and forth. He abruptly halted and fixed the child with his gaze. The child's eyes were full of tears as he gazed at the large cat, his cheeks red and swollen from crying. With a violent display of his teeth, the lion roared and lifted his head. The child had nowhere to run on the dusty road. Scout growled again, his eyes gleaming with rage as he looked at the child. Scout had lived in the safari reserve since wildlife warden Ethan saved him as a cub. Ethan discovered Scout curled up beside his mother's dead body after poachers attacked her. Ethan took in the cub, waking up at all hours of the night to feed and tend to him because he was too small to live without his mother. Ethan, having worked at the reserve since he was 16, recognized the significance of acclimating Scout to other lions promptly to avoid his excessive dependence on humans. Ethan merely prayed that one of the seasoned mothers would adopt Scout as her daughter. The vast reserve was home to multiple lion prides. Therefore, as soon as the youngster was strong enough, the ranger handed him over to a lioness who had just given birth to her third cub. Ethan prayed that Scout would benefit from the combination of her being a ferociously protective mother and one of the most loving lionesses he had ever seen. Fortunately, the lioness took Scout in, as the ranger had gained valuable insights from his experience. Ethan was really pleased with the result and saw Scout mature and grow apart from pride over the ensuing years. Because male lions were lonely animals, it was always risky to leave the pride's protection for the first time. Even though Ethan knew that Scout had a higher chance of survival in the reserve, he could still encounter a more powerful male, leading to battles over territory or females. Because of the lion prides in the area, Ethan loved working there, but he always kept a close watch on Scout. The young ranger had a personal stake in the lion's life because he had saved him as a cub, but Scout would shortly do something the ranger could never have predicted. Scout seems to settle in nicely at the reserve despite having a difficult upbringing. He quickly rose to prominence as one of the reserve's most powerful males thanks to his courage, aggressive demeanor, and enormous size. Ethan was aware that Scout had prevailed in numerous fights. The animals on the reserve lived much like they would in the wild, albeit with protection from poachers and access to veterinarian staff in case they needed it. Since many of the creatures were endangered species, it was crucial to ensure their survival. Ethan believed he was in the best place, even though he occasionally worried about Scout. The reserve lately had some problems with hunters entering the area, despite its best efforts to keep the animals safe from poachers. It was now crucial to fortify the reserve's perimeter and put an end to poaching, even though no animals had yet suffered harm. These loosened boundaries frequently resulted in Scout encountering a crying youngster. The lone lion woke up from his sleep. The lions were most active during the cooler hours of the day when the sun rose. The lion stretched languidly while Scout's tummy growled softly. Hunting time has arrived. It could be difficult to find food when not a member of a pride, but Scout appeared to handle things rather well. With his enormous paws outstretched in front of him, the enormous lion stood and stretched once more. However, the lion halted abruptly for an unknown reason. The breeze carried a strange, familiar smell and a sound that caught his attention. As the lion followed his instincts, he unexpectedly came across a weeping, deserted youngster on the dirt path. Scout licked his lips and moved closer to the child. Scout found the young child sitting in the middle of the street. He had drawn his blue jacket hood up over his head. He cried loudly and frantically, perhaps 3 years old. While maintaining a safe distance, the lion started to circle the young kid, keeping his gaze fixed on him. The sound was sharp, and Scout's behavior became increasingly erratic. At this point, the lion was pacing back and forth, seemingly conflicted by the circumstances. Then he stopped abruptly. The air took on a fresh aroma. Scout's hackles sprang up as he sniffed. Scout met the youngster's gaze, his face swollen from crying. Scout bared his teeth and roared fearfully. The lion startled the young boy into silence. Scout's eyes appeared to be filled with anger, but the youngster saw that the lion was averting his gaze. He had his eyes fixed on his shoulder. Suddenly, Scout rushed over to the young kid and leapt over his head. I apologize for the disruption. I respectfully ask that you like the video and subscribe to this channel before we continue with the story. For us, it's incredibly crucial. Many thanks. The young child turned around upon hearing a terrible thumping sound. Scout loomed over the second lion, pinning him to the ground, his massive claws screaming and snatching. After a brief battle between the two lions, Scout defeated the second one. The second lion strained to get free from Scout's claws as Ethan drove down the gravel road, oblivious to the amazing scene that would soon meet him. As the ranger turned the corner, he saw the two lions fighting, which is a common occurrence in his line of work. However, the sight of the young boy standing a few feet away from the lions made him feel ill. He felt he was in danger, but he didn't know how a child had entered the reserve. Ethan depressed the accelerator, sending his vehicle hurtling in the boy's direction. As the larger lion roared and turned back to face the youngster, the second lion limped away, having released himself from Scout's weight. Even though Ethan cherished Scout beyond all else, the reserve would have suffered greatly if he had hurt the young child. Ethan nearly crashed his jeep in horror at what transpired next, though. As he surveyed his territory to make sure there was nothing else that could hurt the boy, the enormous lion lay down next to him, forming a barrier of protection. It was not a battle for food between two lions, as Ethan had recently observed. Scout had been keeping the kid safe. To save the boy, he had fought the other lion. Ethan recalled the moment he discovered Scout crying against his mother's corpse. Had he noticed something that spoke to him in the weeping child? Ethan was in awe of whatever had transpired. Despite the lion's protection, the ranger had to get the youngster off the road and investigate what had happened, so he sincerely hoped he had assessed Scout correctly. He was unsure of what he would do if Scout forbade him from being close to the youngster. Ethan turned off the engine and opened the door of the jeep gently. Scout trusted Ethan more than any other ranger on the reserve. Even if the lion spent hours observing and following him, it would never trouble the young ranger. Although Scout was always aware of his presence, it seemed as though he still remembered Ethan saving him, which caused him to behave differently toward the ranger. As he left the security of his car, all he could hope was that it would now work in his favor. Although Scout saw Ethan approach, the enormous lion was not in a hurry to move. As if evaluating the ranger's credibility, he glanced up and down at him. He got to his feet and walked off after giving it a long stretch. Ethan waited calmly. After passing Scout's test, he wasn't going to rush and spoil everything. Ethan took the boy into his arms and held him till the lion was safely away. The child appeared to be at ease with Scout by his side, but now that the lion was gone, the boy had begun to scream once more. Ethan had to hold on to the boy as he drove back to the office cautiously and slowly. His thoughts were racing the entire time. What had caused his roadside abandonment? He was also still in disbelief at what Scout had done. The quickest approach to trying to learn more about the youngster was to examine the CCTV tape in the hopes of capturing something. However, Ethan discovered something heartbreaking when he looked over CCTV footage from the reserve borders. The video showed a tattered old automobile just beyond the reserve boundary. The driver was a young man, as Ethan could just make out. A young woman carrying a toddler got out of the car after a little while. Upon a cursory glance around, she appeared to find the weakness in the fence she was seeking. After several attempts, she managed to force her way through with the youngster, placing him on the dirt track where Ethan had previously seen him. The park ranger saw the mother give the young kid a forehead kiss before leaving him behind and getting back into the car. Ethan captured the young child on camera looking for his parents, but they were nowhere in sight. Ethan was more perplexed than before. Something informed Ethan that the mother had been compelled to leave the young child behind, and the forehead kiss had been sweet and affectionate. However, why in the reserve, where he would be at risk? Did she expect someone to monitor the security cameras to ensure the child's immediate rescue? Did she believe a ranger would be around to save the child? The young man surmised that he would never be able to fully answer all of his inquiries. Naturally, he was determined to find the young boy's parents, but he sensed their disappearance long ago. Ethan prepared a meal for the young boy after watching the video. The ranger concluded that since the boy appeared to have calmed down, it would be wise to try to elicit some information from him before calling the police. However, the boy appeared scared, and the only information Ethan could gather from him was that his name was David. It was time to make some tough phone calls, but while Ethan was talking to the authorities, he noticed David eating his lunch hesitantly and had an odd thought. Ethan had recently seen that same lion shield a little child after his parents deserted him, and he had saved Scout when he was a cub when his mother passed away. The situation appeared to have reverted to its original state. Scout had usually stayed with the ranger, but this time there wouldn't be anyone to look after the youngster once he left Ethan's care. The young man understood that his parents had to have abandoned him out of desperation. Ethan understood the high cost of raising a child and the poverty of several locals in the reserve's surrounding area. After watching the video of the young woman and David frantically searching for his parents, Ethan felt depressed about what would happen to him once he left the reserve. David was watching films on Ethan's phone when the police showed up. After finishing his meal, the young ranger couldn't contain his laughter as the child became animated, pointing outdoors and yelling, "Lion." Ethan questioned the authorities about the child's future. If they cannot find any family members to adopt him, they will place the youngster in an orphanage. For a small child, it felt like a lot of change and disruption, and Ethan didn't want to consider the potential effects on him. Before Ethan had a chance to consider his actions, the young ranger offered to watch the boy while the police searched for his family. It was an insane move. Despite his lack of child-rearing expertise, he was enamored with the young boy, just as Scout had been years earlier. However, a few days later, Ethan got some unfavorable news. There was no sign of David's family. It would be necessary for the young boy to go to the orphanage. The child caught the young ranger's attention. He had quickly adapted, and only yesterday did Ethan take him on a ride to visit the lions. The youngster shrieked with joy when he saw the cubs roaming around. Seeing the reserve he cherished so much from a new perspective was enchanting. Ethan was aware that David might wonder why later in life. The reason behind his abandonment. Even though no one could ever be certain, someone would eventually be able to tell him that his parents loved him, and that a courageous lion had saved his life. Ethan was that individual. The young man had already made up his mind. The ranger would not place David in an orphanage. The ranger would adopt him. Ethan had to go through the drawn-out adoption procedure to become David's legal guardian, which made the following few months challenging. Ultimately, though, the new father and kid celebrated their newest chapter together by taking a drive to see the lions. Scout was basking in the late evening sun in the vicinity of David's discovery. The lion saw a young boy staring at him through the glass as the jeep passed slowly. Scout languidly lifted his head to gaze at the man who had now saved not just him but also a young lad. When Scout was old enough to comprehend, Ethan was eager to share the entire narrative with his son. The ranger's life may appear unusual because he has a rescued lion and a toddler as family, but he wouldn't have it any other way. Was this story enjoyable for you? If you were Ethan, how would you have responded? Would you have placed the infant in an orphanage or adopted him? Ever catch a glimpse of a lion? Tell us in the comments section below. Please leave a like and subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed the story. Ethan truly demonstrated how enormous his heart is. Courage, not fear, is always necessary for love. I sincerely appreciate you listening, and I hope to see you again soon. Enjoy your wonderful day.